Українське незалежне радіо.
Okay, we're live. Ellen Lopatkina, thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so we were just talking off mic. A lot of this war, from my perspective, seems to be about logistics.
Any war is about logistics.
And
There's books written about logistics of war. There's scientific papers written about logistics of war. The logistics in war has started being important at the times of when the art of war was written. The first mention of logistics in war is actually in the art of war. So it's thousands and thousands of years old.
well, it's a problem that doesn't change as long as physics doesn't change, right? How do you get the stuff you need to the place you need it?
You'd think.
Okay, what do you mean by
So
that?
any logistics is planning.
Okay,
Any logistics is forecasting. Any logistics is forecasting unpredictable stuff. So you go with best case scenario, worst case scenario, and then goes logistics because that's way beyond the worst case scenario. And people that fail to realize that are the ones that actually run out of ammo, don't have evac routes established for their soldiers, so you just dump them in the fields, wounded or dead.
run out of gas.
Run out of
don't have enough
gas.
food.
They don't have directions. They send guys in tanks with no GPSs and their phones taken away at the home base.
Right.
So the logistics, they make or break the war. Napoleon was the first one who really, really realized the importance of it, and that was one of the factors that made him so successful in his endeavors in Europe. And again, logistics was his pitfall.
Yeah, because when he
didn't
went
plan.
east, right?
And now we have a Napoleon wannabe just east of Ukraine that kind of done the same thing. Just
Yeah.
like Napoleon, he didn't plan that the war is going to take as long as it was going to, so he didn't plan the logistics of resupply.
Well, that was the question that I was leading to: is how stupid was the Russian leadership for even starting
Well,
this thing?
every day that passes by and we hear news from home, we kind of realize that the level of stupidity when we thought they've reached the max, they kind of break that ceiling pretty easily the next day. So it's stupid.
Did you see that video with the mushroom cloud in Crimea?
Yeah, that was outstanding.
So, from what I've been reading, obviously we're not privy to all the information.
Of
but
course.
Nobody even knows how they pulled it off yet, right? It's just like suddenly there are, and the thing that's interesting to me too, as an aside, you have, obviously I don't want to see anybody get hurt, but you see tourists in Crimea and they're filming this mushroom cloud, right? What are they doing
That's
vacationing
why Darwin's
next to a war zone?
exist. So, and the whole nation should get it at this point. What are they doing? That self-confidence, the, pardon my French,
just-
cockiness.
Yeah, a bravado that they think they're going to win.
What
but-
they've lived on for
Yeah.
years, for decades, since the Soviet Union came to be, since the Soviet Union supposedly won the World War II on their own. God forbid somebody mentions the Lend-Lease
Right.
back in the 40s. Ever since, the propaganda has been you're superior, you're the smartest nations. The Americans are dumb, Asians are dumb, Africans are dumb and lazy. There is no superior nation than Russia. And that's been brainwashed into generations of the whole nation.
Yeah.
So in combination with degradation, lack of education, everybody thinks Russia and equates that with Moscow, St. Petersburg. No, those are separate entities, and so it's like Liechtenstein or Monaco. It's a entity within entity. It has nothing to do with the rest of Russia.
Austin, Texas, Ann Arbor, Michigan, outlier places, right?
Yes. So, you want to think Russia, you still think an outhouse in the outside or no running water or no internet in the village. And that's your Russia. So why are we surprised to see them filming an explosion that can potentially kill them? Just because they observe the rest of the world in the same way. That's people that touch, naked wires. pretty much regularly.
Well, the thing that even surprised me was not so much that they're filming it, because now everybody's got a phone, right? So everybody films everything. But even the fact that they were just they're just vacationing in
Well,
Crimea.
Crimea to them is not a war zone. As far as they know, southern Ukraine has welcomed everybody with flowers and bouquets and
Yeah.
watermelons right there in March, and they're very welcome there, and they feel at home.
Yeah.
And it's that confidence. You feel at home. So even if your neighbor's house goes up in flames, you're sitting on your porch, sipping your coffee, waiting for the fire engine to show up. And that's pretty much what they are feeling. They're cocky because they feel at home. They own the place. So yeah, something blew up. Well, it's probably a moron, probably my neighbor's son that went into the army that literally probably smoked next to an open gas tank or something. And they really want to believe that they're invincible, and they've been told for years that they were invincible, the second army in the world. Well, the second army in the world is fighting in the third world country outfits with weapons manufactured before I was born, and I'm pretty old. So, yeah, no.
Well, that's the thing. They're going to run out of their modern stuff. The
They
Russians
have,
are.
pretty much.
And they're going to be left with the Soviet stuff.
They already shooting, like every time, my husband's family is from Kharkiv.
Yeah.
So we pretty much know what they're shooting just from the debris that people are collecting in the fields. And a lot of stuff that's ending up in the villages around Kharkiv has been made in early 80s, late 70s. So that's already Soviet stuff. They still have, we can't lie to ourselves and say they're going to run out of that stuff. They will, but it's going to take a while because for decades they've been compiling this stuff.
It could take years.
And right now they have
Yeah.
almost unlimited supply of Soviet crap that's very low quality. It's been in storage for a long time, so it's going to litter our land with unexploded devices that's going to take years to diffuse. And that's something that we all want to be optimistic, and I'm the first one that wants to see the war end where Ukraine definitely is the winner, but we also have to understand that stuff that they're shooting at us, either they run out of it or not, is in our soil, in our land, in our villages, and this war, even though it's going to be over hopefully within reasonable amount of time, the echoes of that war are going to be heard for decades. And that's the most painful thing, because these things actually hurt civilian, primarily children.
Yeah.
Because it's the child that you can't stop from wandering into the field or into the forest by the village or discovering stuff or touching new stuff or trying to dig out a metal piece that they found. And if you look at the post-war countries like Bosnia, Georgia, the amount of civilian pediatric casualties and injuries is just horrendous, and that's where you see sometimes commercials for foundations that help with prostheses for kids come from those countries right after the conflict.
Yeah.
So, do we hope that the logistics were very poorly planned? We don't have to hope. We know they've been very poorly planned. The resupply was not established as it should have. The troop movement was not planned and replanned properly.
And everyone underestimated Ukraine's reforms to its army from 2014 up until the invasion.
I think they knew exactly what the army was, because there's just we can't deny the fact that there was a lot of pro-Russian and then working for Russian people right within the military, and even though it has improved since 2014 significantly, we can't say that Russians were unprepared for it. They were. They knew exactly what we had, where we had it, how much of it we had it. What they underestimated is the people's desire to be free and have their own say in their own destiny.
That's the I've heard this before. That's the difference. I think maybe the takeaway. What's the main difference between Russia and Ukraine? Right? In Russia, it's head of state down, and in Ukraine, it's the opposite. Right? So if without the leader, Russia has no direction, and in Ukraine, without the leader, civil society will pick up the slack.
That is true. That is true. And when we look back into the centuries of such famous Russian history, they have always been ruled. Even in Soviet Union, as much as they want to think there was a people for people, it was nothing like it. People were cheap labor that survived on bare minimums. Because if you compare the Soviet Union society and American or Western European society at the same time, the level of living, the level of goods that we were allowed, or quality of goods that we're allowed to have or had access to, is not even comparable. When you think when the common family car started happening in the US, and then you look at the Soviet Union, only the chosen few, or you had to be an amputee or war hero or a labor hero or something to be even assigned a line that would take 15 years to get a car.
Plus, it was a Lada. Have you ever?
A Lada was Lada was an upgrade. Okay, it was Zaporozhets, Pobeda, Moskvich. Lada was for fancy people. Lada, you had to have connections. A lot of them. So Russians that was okay with them.
Yeah.
Ukrainians, we are gazdy. We are gatherers, and we are hunters, and we take care of our household, and we take care of our land. That's why when the Soviets came, we saw a lot of Bolsheviks taking people that actually achieved something in their life. So they had the fields that they tended to, they had the farms, they had some sort of manufacturing. They destroyed all that. They destroyed private property, the sense of private property. Ukrainians, somewhere on Facebook there was, if you think Ukrainians are going to give in to this war, you've never seen them fight over the property line. And nothing can literally describe Ukrainian more. We have a very, very strong sense of private property. This is mine. I worked for this. This belongs to me. Russia? Well, I want his apartment. I didn't do anything to get an apartment just like his. I'm just going to write to FSB and say that he said something bad about Stalin, Lenin, or all of them together. And all of a sudden, this neighbor is out, and I get that apartment as a benefit. So there was no, they don't have a connection between hard work and the benefits you reap from it. They've been a society of a leech. The Soviet Union, Russia leached from the other 14 republics. Centralized economy allowed for that. And it's literally a leech of a society. It's a society that attaches itself to a more successful neighbor and drains it of its juices forever until the neighbor's dead. And Ukrainian fought back. And they didn't plan on it.
Right.
Because just like any leech, mosquito, you tick, they numb you first, and then they bite you. And that's why you don't feel the bite. So the propaganda that's been going on for years, ever since the fall of Soviet Union, that propaganda was that numbing agent. They just underestimated the amount that it would take the Ukrainian society to become numb to becoming a host to a parasite.
So let me kind of go down the path of this metaphor that you're putting down, okay? So meaning leading up to February 24th, there was sort of, I mean, people were divided, obviously, but I would say with people that I spoke with, the greater majority of them expected there to not be
I was one of them.
At
3 days before war, I think 21st of February, when we realized it actually is going to happen. Up until that time, Russia has done so much posturing, so much flexing their muscles on the borders of other countries, including Baltic region, that nobody really expected them to do anything. And in turn now, I think Russia expected Ukrainians to go, listen, hey, stop, let's talk, we'll accept some changes, and it didn't happen. So, yeah, it's hard to describe the feelings when we finally realize that it's not posturing. It's they've taken it again. I think they were hoping for not the beginning of war, but they were hoping for Ukraine to initiate a dialogue on their terms at that time. Kind of seeing similar scenario with China and Taiwan, I think, right now, where they're doing these military drills into kind of showing, hey, see what we can do, so you better do what we want you to do. But Ukrainians got very confident with the election of Zelensky, because I think that was a freak of political nature that nobody expected. And they kind of realized, as favorable or unfavorable people view his presidency or the election itself.
Yeah. It's been up and down for sure.
But the fact that it was even possible has given Ukrainians that confidence boost in knowing that they determine their own fate. And I think that was a contributing factor in Ukrainians acting the way they acted when the military drills were going on the outskirts of Kharkiv and Donbas region and southern Ukraine, all the way through Belarus as well. So Ukrainians knew, hey, we could have done this. Well, you know what? Here's our middle finger to you, Eastern neighbor. So they didn't initiate the dialogue. And, Russians, just like a drunkard that's not being let back into the bar, is trying to smash in the door. And they pretty much did. But the fact that we have a whole bunch of good bartenders, even though they're armed with sticks and brooms, at some point, at least at the beginning, they were able to hold him at the door or not far in. The damage is done. The damage is horrible. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah. Well, regardless of who thought what was going to happen next, because obviously you can't predict the future, I don't think anybody expected Ukrainians to give up or give in. And that includes...
I think actually a lot of world did.
You think so?
I think so.
Well, at least maybe people that aren't familiar with Ukrainians, let's put it that way.
I think most of the world actually, and that's why there was such a delayed reaction in help, was because...
Did you think it was going to be because people thought they were going to lose so spectacularly, so quickly, or because they would have given up?
No, I think the propaganda, and we underestimate, we think the Russian propaganda is only in former Soviet Union pool of countries.
It's not, yeah.
It's not. It's everywhere. It's on Mexican TV. It's on Spanish TV. It's on Portugal's TV.
It's on American TV.
It's on Indian TV. It's on American TV. It's everywhere. So up until this time, we get comments from, let's say, Mexico nationals. And Russian propaganda is extremely strong in the Spanish-speaking segment of the world, unfortunately. And they literally quote whatever the Russian propaganda says. The Nazi supporters, the neo-Nazis, the fascists in Ukraine, the dictatorship of Zelensky, just the gibberish baloney that makes no sense, but they've seen it so many times on TV, it's got to be true, right? Because you've seen it so many times. So I don't think the help was because somebody wanted to see how much fight this little dog has in him. I think it was because the propaganda was extremely strong. The opinion was that it is an internal conflict and it's going to get hashed out. That Ukraine is going to come and say, okay, fine, let's bring who you want. Yanukovych, okay, let's bring that thug in. Just let's not, we know that we don't have the army, we know we don't have the defense forces to fight it off. Let's not kill people, let's hush it out, fine, we'll become another Belarus. You'll put another mustached monkey at the helm of our country, and that's going to be the end of it. And it didn't happen. Ukrainians didn't want any of it. They paid in blood in 2014. They've got the taste of what the will of people can actually do and change in politics with the election of Zelensky. And they were not going down easy. So, and then when the world saw the fight, everybody roots for the underdog. Absolutely everybody. No matter what your opinion of Russia or Putin or how much you envy you can have for the second army in the world, you see this little, because we're tiny compared to Russia. We're small. We're 1/3 of a population. Our army, just the asset size compared to Russian is nothing. And yet we put up a heck of a fight. And that brings that underdog in everybody. And every single nation, that we know has had some beef with Russia at some point in their history. Because there is something somewhere in everybody's history where Russia did them wrong. I mean, you can say that about some nations, a lot of nations, but literally.
Well, some people might make that argument about the United States. I guess it's a perspective
True,
idea.
but United States has been in existence for not so long. Russia has been in existence much longer, and not definitely as long as Ukraine, but they have caused way more grievances than U.S. can ever manage to. The thing is that U.S. is a democracy with free speech. You can criticize the government and say what you think about their actions until you're blue in the face. In Soviet Union, whatever the government did was the greatest thing ever. They sent their army into Mongolia to fight. A lot of wars that Soviet Union participated in are not even, people don't even know. My own uncle, may he rest in peace, participated in one of the Mongolian military actions that absolutely nobody in Soviet Union was even aware of. When he was in the military and he was in action, sent there in cattle cars on trains, they were told to write to their families that they're stationed outside of Lviv, and they're just there going through trainings. They're not participating anywhere. They have not even been moved. Their letters were read by the commander before they were packaged and sealed into envelopes and sent home. And when they came home, they came with a postage stamp from Lviv. They didn't come from Mongolia. And the number of military actions the Soviet Union was involved in that people are not really aware of is extremely large. So when people start thinking, oh, U.S. intervenes, no. When you dig deeper and when you start digging out the history of particular smaller countries, especially the countries where the Soviet Union was fighting for influence, you'll find military action, you'll find invasions, you'll find killings, you'll find tanks, Russian weapons, Russians weaponizing separatist movements or independence fighters, pretty much everywhere. So it just wasn't brought up into public. Nobody was. If you discussed that, you were going to labor camps. Best case scenario.
So let's jump to February, end of February, or jump back to the end of February. The full-scale invasion happens, and you started a foundation.
Yes.
Ukrainian
Resistance
Foundation.
Or UkrainiansUnited.org, as people know us, because it came kind of a child of a few brainy people that had multiple ideas at the same time, and things were very fast-paced at that time because you needed to start doing things.
So, successful business person, Ellen Lopatkina, running a successful logistics operation, a growing one of the fastest growing in the state of Illinois, right?
Yes, we were recognized as such.
And now you're a philanthropist, social activist.
Honestly, never thought I would end up in that position. I love what I do. Obviously, logistics is my soul, my nature. I absolutely enjoy what I do, and I think it's a contributing part to the success of our company. I mean, 99% of the success of our company is the team that I have and their hard work and dedication and creativity too. But yes, I ended up in so many kind of hats that I never imagined I would. I was never active in the community. I was never involved in the community. I rarely ever even visited community events, to be honest. But that was the time of unity for everybody, I think. And that was the time where you went and figured out that no matter what the differences or differences in opinions or differences in backgrounds or differences in languages and even the understanding of the conflict itself, if you wanted and were willing to help, you needed to do that. You needed to put everything aside, what have bothered you or didn't bother or you didn't care about before. You had to start doing things, and you had to start doing things right. Because we saw at the beginning a lot of banging the head against the wall
As far
kind
as
of
what?
situations. Logistics.
Like
a lot of people
wanting to send stuff to Ukraine.
People jumping into things with the best intentions, and honestly, through my whole life, I keep repeating the same thing, that pathway to hell is paved with good intentions. And that's a lot of that we saw the first days, the first month of war, where people, out of the goodness of their heart, they were trying to collect whatever, without putting a second thought into the logistics. So yes, they cleaned out their pantry. They brought canned food that was expired in 2016, best case scenario. They brought very used clothes. They brought stuff that absolutely is unusable because they wanted to do something. They wanted to feel that they're doing something to help.
Sure, yeah.
And it's absolutely normal, and that needed to happen. It needed to get people motivated to do more because, yes, the next time they came, they brought food that was not expired anymore. And maybe the clothes was new. And maybe they actually, instead of bringing stuff that was unnecessary, not needed, not asked for, they donated to cover the shipping costs. Anytime there's a volunteer movement, that first initial knee-jerk reaction in the communities, in the society, is very disorganized. It's very messy. There's a lot of collateral fallout from it. There's a lot of wasted resources. There's volume to it. Just at the beginning of any tragedy, conflict, disaster, there's a volume of help that comes at first, but that's not necessarily quality help.
Well, you're saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, so I actually have a surprise for you.
Oh,
Because
gosh.
your good intentions have paved the road to this. So I have Tatiana Kozak from Stand With Ukraine Foundation in LA. Tatiana, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Here, let me put the volume up a little bit. You know who that is. So there's
Probably.
so you are helping a lot of people, Ellen, and I'm going to actually let Tanya speak for what you've done for their organization. Go ahead, Tanya.
Okay. Well, it's my pleasure, and I'm very happy to have such a great opportunity to say thank you to Ukrainian resistance and personally to Allah for such a big help, huge support. We all are very grateful. All Stand With Ukraine Foundation for such an amazing collaboration and connection that we are having together, and for everything we can do together for Ukraine. And I am so happy that we actually found Allah, because I'm calling people like Allah angels of Ukraine. Seriously, she's amazing, Alechka. Thank you very much for everything. In fact, Allah's tracks are picking up 58 pallets this Thursday from our Los Angeles warehouse, and before that she picked up 48 more pallets. I mean, that's unbelievable. And thank you for all of us, from all Ukrainians in LA, in the world, and everywhere, because we are doing big thing together. Thank you, Alechka.
Thank you, Tanya.
Thanks, Tanya. I appreciate it. We'll be in touch, okay? I want you to come on here next time, all right?
Oh, we'll fly to
Not a
LA.
problem.
Yeah, next from LA.
Have a wonderful
Take
day.
care. So, pallets on trucks from LA with medical supplies to Ukraine.
Yes.
That's the kind of stuff you're doing.
And that's our goal is, as I said, I love logistics. It's in my blood for generations, unfortunately. And I hope my son doesn't inherit any of it, but because it's a very hectic job. But getting that help that was coming in organized, sorted, kind of routed the right ways, teaching people that any small action at the very beginning has a very large consequence at the end, be that the cost, be that the distribution difficulties, be that just the shipping itself, possible or impossible, because it is the whole supply chain, and we're dealing with the supply chain of a war is extremely complex, and people don't get it. It's not the same as sending a parcel to a family. It's hundreds or thousands of parcels mixed, mingled together.
Yeah. So what kind of stuff are you sending overseas? Clothes?
So
Right.
right now we go a lot on what is requested, because what happened at the beginning was, and it's very
Because there's stuff you
similar
can send
to
and
what we saw
Yeah.
at the COVID onset or the continuance of COVID pandemic, where
What do you
we
mean by
had
that? Like
bottlenecks
Okay.
in transportation. So what started happening at the beginning of the aid going to Ukraine, we started creating artificially out of intentions, best intentions. Everybody wanted to send help.
Yeah.
We started clogging the arteries, the
And there's stuff you
logistic
can-
arteries of
yeah.
the country.
And there's stuff you can send and stuff you can't send.
Yes. So we started cluttering the lifeline to Ukraine. We started cluttering the steam lines that were already overwhelmed because of the pandemic and the fallout from the pandemic. We started cluttering the warehouses where first you get stuff that nobody wants because it's not needed,
Yeah.
or there is no way to distribute it at this point. And then you get stuff that is needed, but you can't offload it off the trucks into the warehouse because the warehouse is full. So it took time. It took a lot of finagling and making bridges and creating partnerships with a whole bunch of companies, NGOs in Ukraine, NGOs in the United States, trying to coordinate the efforts. Just like Tanya, they have tremendous ability to collect high quality medical supplies that are going to hospitals, that are going to nonprofits that supply the front lines with the medical stuff. But they don't know how to get it there. Mm-hmm. And we have the ability. My company donated, I'm not going to throw the amount because it's a large number. I don't want to be bragging, or it's a large number of services and money to
Seven figures.
transport, yes, and to transport stuff into Ukraine. And we're still covering large shipping bills ourselves for transporting stuff like medical supplies, food, clothing, hygiene products. So when we have requests from NGOs or hospitals or government organizations that are saying, okay, we have a camp for temporary displaced persons, and we understand that the need in food and proteins and just normal meals for those people is extremely important. So we get to make a decision based on logistics. What is the urgency of the request? When is that stuff needed? And what is going to be less costly, us procuring that product in Ukraine or in Europe and getting it to the consignee right away, or we have time and it's going to be less costly to send it from here. And we want a lot of NGOs, when they're facing that choice, okay, we've collected this much stuff, what do we do with it? Call us. Call my company. They'll direct you to a group of people that not only do their full-time jobs, but there are full-time aid coordinators that will tell you, okay, this is what we can offer you. This is going to be the least expensive option. If you want to pay or fundraise for shipping costs, and we were able to negotiate a low rate with the shipping companies, with big steam lines that have are doing that as their part of the effort to help Ukraine, and get us actually room on steam lines, because getting on the ship right now is very complicated. There's a line. And if you want your stuff to go there as soon as possible, you got to have some friends in those steam lines. And thankfully, through networking, through community, through the past 6 months, we've built bridges that are sustainable, bridges that are usable, not just to us as NGO, but we're willingly sharing that with Tanya, with her NGO, with other NGOs. And we've shipped ambulances on what's called roll-on, roll-off ships, and we're planning another sail together with Umana on the 29th of August, and other NGOs, about 6 ambulance vehicles fully stuffed, stocked with medical supplies, and we make sure that there is not an inch of free space in them before they depart.
And you've got somebody over there looking to see where that stuff goes, right?
Yes.
So, money too, right? There
Yes.
was, so tell me about, this is what I heard you talk about one time. There was was it a school for blind children in Kharkiv?
It is.
Tell me about that.
So I mentioned my husband is from Kharkiv, and before the war, my company itself, myself personally, we've supported a group of about 53 families with severely disabled children, some of them blind, some of them with a lot of other disabilities, a lot of palliative care, end-of-life care, because that is unfortunately non-existent, has been non-existent in Ukraine. So what we had an opportunity to run a fundraiser, somewhat semi-private event, in collaboration with another company in Chicagoland. And we've decided to benefit the school for the blind or visually impaired children in Kharkiv.
They're not in Kharkiv now, though, are they?
They're
They
not.
have to move?
They're in Lviv Oblast. They're in Lviv region right now. They're relocated because their building was damaged in the very first weeks of the war. I think it was March, in the 20th of March, somewhere in those dates, where they were in the basement having lunch when the rocket hit their building. So the building is heavily damaged, and obviously Kharkiv being hit pretty much every day, it is not safe for them to return or rebuild right now.
I'd be interested to hear what Amnesty International has to say about the Russians bombing a school for the blind children.
Well, they're probably gonna find something in that school that has triggered Russians, you know. I don't know, blind were not blind enough, the children were not children-ish enough.
They should have been looking for rockets,
Yes,
right?
maybe a blind child sang an anthem too loud, it was heard in Belgrade. I don't know, they will find something to justify what's happening to Kharkiv and other cities in Ukraine. Again, the propaganda is strong. We underestimate we think U.S., everybody was so gung-ho about the propaganda and Trump being loud and ridiculous, and yes, he was. But that's not the kind of propaganda we're talking about. It's the quiet dribbling on your mind through years and months and days where you see it. Not openly, where somebody comes out in the military gear or, you know, all with the military awards on his chest and says, well, this is, you know, we got to listen to Putin. And no, it's those, if you look at the movies shot in Russia, if you watch them, I mean, I did, my husband watched up until some point in 2014, we completely stopped. But then you see the commercials for them here and there. It's soaked in propaganda. It is not obvious, but if you're watching it, there's going to be a Putin portrait in the back. They're going to mention him in only favorable tones.
Sure.
There's not going to be criticizing of the government. There's going to be pushing of a national we're better than everybody else idea. There's got to be, you got to sacrifice for the country. You have to die for your country. You have to give up this for your country. It's soaked through. It's so ingeniously hidden in everyday's life that you don't understand what you're swallowing at that point.
So this is something that I've been thinking about lately, and you bring it up, this is talking about propaganda, right? So obviously, in my opinion, the war is black and white in that there's a right side and a wrong side. There's an unprovoked, murderous dictator who's just coming in and causing mayhem and treachery and destruction for no reason, right? But then you hear, I guess the main detraction from the West is, why, you hear from sort of the extremes. You hear from the right extreme, you hear from the left extreme. Why are we supporting the Ukrainians? Their government is corrupt. They're, this kind of thing. So there's elements of propaganda and everything, right? So what I'm getting to is, are you concerned, because eventually this war ends, right? And, looking at the logistics, Russia may have already lost. So let's say, Ukraine is victorious. Are you worried? What happens next? What happens next with you? What are you going to do with all these, this infrastructure and all these,
Yes.
this goodwill that you've built? And two, are you not worried that then, okay, once the war is over and, Zelensky or whoever's in charge has to get back to governance, that the old problems are going to come back?
I'm going to break it into sections. So
Yeah.
what happens, the easiest answer is what happens to us after the war is over, and I can't wait for that period because I'll be able to actually take more than a few days of a vacation probably. Life will never be the same. It's our life. There's going to be before war. There's going to be a war that we're going to talk about where everybody was on the 24th of February and where everybody was on the day the victory is announced, and the segments of tragedy or happiness or moments that brought tears to your eyes in between. And then there's going to be the life after. And that network that we built right now, we built that in a way that it's sustainable in a way longer term, where it's going to create the bridges, the logistics bridges, the communications, the networks that will help Ukraine rebuild. And that will take decades. We want to be very optimistic, but let's also be realistic. This is not going to be a rebuilding in 3 to 5 years. We're talking a very long term. We're talking 10, 15 years just to get rid of the explosives on the east and south of Ukraine that are right now already laying on the ground, and they haven't stopped shooting at this point. It's going to take 10 to 15 years to build new infrastructure, to make Ukraine successful. Am I worried that the corruption is going to be back? And I think that worry is in everybody's mind. And I have family that came just a couple of weeks ago from Ukraine. They're staying with us on the U4U, and they're from Kharkiv region. And we had this conversation just yesterday that is the biggest fear. Because if that does come back, we actually lost the war. We didn't win it. Because whatever we're fighting against right now is not just the Putin. It's not just the Russian tanks. It's that. It's the corruption. It's the thievery. It's the complete disarray of a government that has their personal best interests above all. Are we afraid that it's going to come back? Partially, yes. But I do believe that at this point, the Ukrainians have paid the price where they won't let it happen.
Yeah, and I guess the silver lining viewpoint, right? The optimistic viewpoint is just look at the history,
Yes.
right? In the last 30 years, Belarus has had one dictator, Russia has had two, and I mean, you know, two leaders within 30 years, essentially one, right? And Ukraine has had 6 presidents, all in contested elections, with only one incumbent winning re-election. And I repeat that all the time, and I think it's important because think about it, right? Let's say you've got a corrupt system, you've got the vestiges of the old, you know, Soviet system where the government's just too large, and you can't regulate these things if you've just got to, or you know, you can't, not regulate, but you can't, logistically speaking, you can't run a government that's that huge, right? And it's inefficient, and it's going to breed corruption, right? But then civil society, on the other hand, is leaning west, is leaning towards democracy, is leaning towards change and modernization.
We have to understand that the government change, unless you literally have a revolution with, you know, guillotine being pulled up to the Verkhovna Rada, is not going to happen overnight. What we are seeing, right, a lot of people are right now content and very unhappy about not enough heads rolling in the government of Ukraine. And I want them all to remember that even if there is a hostile takeover of the company, let's say there is a takeover, 2 companies are merging, okay, and we're merging old Ukraine with new Ukraine at this point. The new blood is coming in slowly because you have to have people that are trained to do something. You can't keep pulling people from Maidan that had done nothing but farmed their land and tended to their animals and put them in Verkhovna Rada. It's a noble idea.
But then you could say
it doesn't work.
That a comedian or a wedding photographer
correct
is held to the same standard, right?
And yes, but politics are politics, and I'm not talking let's put professional politicians because they're full of we know what. We're talking let's put professionals. If it's people in banking system, put people that have education actually in banking. If it's in law enforcement, let's put people that have combat experience at this point, that have proven themselves not only as patriots, but also as logical, cool-headed, leveled, balanced person with enough skill and enough knowledge to fill that position. Don't do this on emotions. Everybody wants a guy with the, you know, Cossack tail on the head to represent the purity of the nation. No, it might be a guy in a suit. He might be what you kind of resent because that's what Verkhovna Rada guys look like, guys in suits with expensive watches. Well, it's not a bad thing. Put emotions aside, and just like any business, when there is a merger, and as I said, we're merging old Ukraine with new Ukraine, there's going to be new blood from the new company, so that's going to be the combat veterans. It's going to be the volunteers that will rise, and I'm not talking about myself. I have absolutely no interest in politics.
Oh, you've already ruined my surprise ending. You
no,
were going to announce your candidacy for president of Ukraine.
Absolutely not. Not even, no. I'm a U.S. citizen. I am not renouncing my citizenship. I have no place in Ukrainian politics. I absolutely not ever, because that was brought up a few times, and absolutely not. And I swear on my own life on it. I would chop off my own hand. And very, before the war, I was very happy in the place I was. So, and I want to go back to my happy place.
So what's the future then? It's not in government then. It's in the private sector, right? It's in
the private sector. And I think the private sector is going to be the driving force behind the reforms. And we're gonna see a lot of investments going into Ukraine. We're already seeing them. And Ukrainian government, we might like it, we might not like it, but because there's so many young people in there, people with the IT backgrounds, people with education in Europe and US, that understand that if we don't do something, we're going to have a major brain drain
Yeah.
from Ukraine, and we're going to fall back to the old ways fairly quickly. So we have to make sure that we create the environment, the Ukrainians create the environment that is attractive to investments, foreign investments. You don't want to keep lending money from world banks and other countries. You want to attract the investment where people believe and trust that you're going to do right by them. You're literally getting people to invest into the country, into manufacturing, into development. And that is where I see the new blood coming. And that new blood, knowing how it's supposed to be done from their experience in Western Europe, from their experience in US, from their experience in the rest of the world, and also knowing at which price this came, is not really going to eat up the demand for bribes. It's not going to eat up the beating around the bushes because this lot of land was promised to Kum Svat Brat, another relative of mine. I think that's what's going to happen. The old politicians, to some degree, and not all of them are rotten through.
Sure, yeah.
Not all of them. There's
Yeah, there
guys
have to be good
that,
ones and bad ones.
right? There's
Or
guys
ones that are good at something and bad at something. Zelensky's great at PR,
and there
right?
was and there was a lot of people that were on the fence up until February 24th. Just like there was a lot of people that spoke Russian all the way to February 24th, never occurred to them to start speaking Ukrainian, and now you won't get a Russian word out of them. And I talked to our family who's from, and I talked to my family, my husband's family from, they're from Izum. They've lost pretty much everything. The rest of that family cell is from Rubezhne. So obviously all of them are displaced people right now.
Yeah.
And they're settling in Western Ukraine, in my little hometown. And the spouse, the wife, has always spoken Russian in her life. She was from Rubezhne, Luhansk region.
Yeah.
They spoke Russian in the family. She understands Ukrainian. She went to Russian school, spent her whole life there. Husband speaks Ukrainian. He's from Kharkiv, their little village. Everybody's, for some reason, very surprised that people from Kharkiv region speak Ukrainian. And I can tell you it's more common than uncommon. So I spoke with them today and yesterday, and I didn't even realize that, but at some point, something was off when we were talking, and I couldn't pinpoint it until the very end where she stumbled at a Ukrainian word. I'm like, oh, do you speak Ukrainian? And she's like, yep, I have to learn that. I have to reteach myself at 60-some years of age. To not speak Russian. And I think that it's not forced. Nobody's forcing her. I'm like, are you feeling? She's like, no, I want to.
Yeah,
and I
seems
think
like
that's in politics also the same kind of sentiment we're going to see in older politicians, where they understand they can go to doing what they've always done and kind of doing it the way it was done for generations before them, but they don't want to.
Yeah, I mean, Ukrainian language is kind of like a symbol at this point in this, right? I mean, it's not about, I mean, the argument from Putin is that, the Russian culture or the Russian world is being discriminated against in Ukraine. Obviously, that's a lie, but it's not about that, right? Ukrainian language is sort of a symbol in this regard. It's sort of a symbol of freedom, or maybe free thinking, or rebellion against.
It is a national
resistance.
identity. It is something that Russians have tried to eliminate for decades, ever since Soviet Union was formed, because Ukrainian is not the only victim of it. And I have two very kind of interesting stories about the languages and their faith in Soviet Union. So we all know, as Ukrainians, we all know that if you got into a larger city or you got to meet new people, to sound cool and educated, you had to speak Russian in Ukraine. Because if you came to Kiev, or you came to Kharkiv, or you came to Odessa, or you came to Kherson, and you spoke Ukrainian, you're the uneducated swine, you're the villager. Everybody would, kind of disregard you because you speak Ukrainian, you're from the village. We can tell that because you speak Ukrainian. Nobody forced us to speak Russian. Young kids came to the larger cities and they chose to speak Russian to fit in. Peer pressure. Because there was no Ukrainian movies or Ukrainian speaking movies. And it's not just Ukrainian, it's Kazakhs, it's Belarusians, pretty much every republic has suffered the same fate. Their languages, they were not forbidden, they were not forcefully eliminated from education system.
You mean nominally, but in reality, but practically
correct.
they were.
They were
right?
gently made unpopular.
Yeah.
And that's propaganda too. You don't tell people don't speak Ukrainian because you're going to be a villager. No, you're just going to say, well, speaking Russian is cool. All the cool kids speak Russian. And we know that. We know that from high school. We know the peer pressure. We know how it works. That's propaganda, guys. That's how you present. That's proper marketing, if you want it. And in my lifetime, I've met, back in the days, 20 years ago, way before we knew Ukrainian was cool or speaking Ukrainian was cool or Russian wasn't cool. Russian was very commonly accepted language to communicate with people from other republics. And I worked at the bank, and I was a teller back then. And that bank no longer exists, but it was in a very Polish neighborhood. And I had a customer who was obviously struggling to speak English. He absolutely could not even explain what he needed to do. And I looked at his name, and I figured out he was from former Soviet Union by his name. My first and last name are extremely Russian sounding, and there's tons of people that have extremely Russian sounding names and surnames. And I spoke to him in Russian. I'm like, would it be better if I spoke to you, if we spoke in Russian? Because I absolutely don't mind. And he looked at me, and he was in his probably late 50s, and I was in my early 20s. And I was fresh off the boat. And he looked at me and said, no, Russians did everything to destroy my language. I'm from Belarus. I don't want to speak Russian. And I told him, okay, so you can speak to me Belarusian because I obviously don't speak Belarusian. I can reply to you in Russian so you can better understand me. Would that work? And we made a deal, so he spoke Belarusian with broken English to me, and I spoke Russian with Ukrainian to him, and we kind of made that work. But back then, I thought to myself, dude is crazy. Dude is literally lost his marbles somewhere on his way to the U.S. And that story has surfaced up in my life multiple times. In 2014, it finally clicked what it meant. Up until that point, I literally thought the dude was crazy. So I apologize if you're listening to me. I realized what it meant. It hit home. That story actually, at that point, hit home. That, yes, they did everything possible to destroy the language, to eliminate it from existence. My great-grandfather, he was born in Kazakhstan. And to a Russian family, supposedly, we did the DNA test. I have very, very, very little Russian blood in me. So they were probably Ukrainians, because mostly I'm Ukrainian and Polish, as weird as it sounds. So, and I have some Balkan blood for some. I don't know where Lithuanians came from, I swear. But...
probably from Lithuania.
Yes. But they were probably a Ukrainian family that at some point before Soviet Union, back in our early 1900s or late 1800s, were taken off their Ukrainian land and sent into exile into Kazakhstan. And that's where my great-grandfather was born in 1910. So to explain how the languages ceased to exist, his birth certificate is written in 2 languages. One side is Russian, and I have it. I thankfully still have the original birth certificate of my great-grandfather. It's not the original, it's the one that was issued in Soviet Union still already. It's a copy because back then there was just church books, no birth certificates. It's an excerpt from the church book. So one side is in Russian, in Kazakhstan, issued in 52. The other side looks Arabic. Completely Arabic, and it was blank, and it was, when I first got the copies of it, I got them as 2 separate documents. I didn't realize that they were the same document, the front and back of the document. So I reached out to some translators, professional translators, and I'm like, I have a document that looks completely Arabic to me. I don't know any people that speak Arabic. Can you ask at least what language it is? Because it will help me decipher where this came from. I know it's from the Kazakhstan region if it helps, but I don't know what it is. So I had a professional interpreter reach out into the translators community. She sent that to about 10 people that specialize in Arabic. And absolutely not a single one could pinpoint that language. They recognize separate words from them. They recognized some of the spellings, but that had multiple meanings. They could not translate the document. They did not recognize the language. So the document issued in 1953. It's not that long ago. It's some 60, 70 years ago.
So it could be a language. You think
it was a Kazakh language.
Okay.
Okay.
So
the person that recognized that was one of the translators' lady's 85-year-old mother. Who saw the document, was like, "Oh, where'd you get it?" It's what Kazakh language used to look like before Soviets came and made them adapt Cyrillic alphabet and phonetically spell out the language that way. That language still exists. So language is above all, is the national identity that should be treasured.
So the takeaway is «Вбий москаля в собі».
Yes.
Слава Україні.
Lopatkina.
Thank you so much for taking
you.
the time to speak with me. This was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Українське незалежне радіо.